Welcome back to the History Shorts podcast, your daily short format history themed variety show and weekly conversation series with the leading voices in history today. Today's conversation is brought to you by thecollector.com, the ultimate online destination for anyone passionate about art, history, and culture. Beautifully curated, easy to read, and perfect for history nerds who want reliable, inspiring content without the fluff. TheCollector.com is just waiting to be discovered. Today, we're turning our attention to a chapter of World War II that many Americans never learned in school, a very real threat to the continental United States on its own shores, right in the early months and years of America's entry into the war. After Pearl Harbor in December of 41, the nation was reeling, but the danger did not stop at the Pacific. In January 42, German Admiral Donitz launched Operation Drumbeat, the second happy time for U-boat commanders. With the U.S. East Coast largely unprepared, no effective blackouts, no convoys, bright city lights silhouetting ships at night, German submarines prowled freely from Newfoundland to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. In those first catastrophic 6 months of 42 alone, U-boats sank hundreds of merchant ships and tankers, over 3 million tons of vital shipping in American waters overall during the campaign, claiming thousands of lives, mostly merchant mariners. Old tankers burned like beacons off New Jersey and Florida. Freighters vanished in sight of shore. The sea became a graveyard. It was so devastating that the Army Chief of Staff, George Marshall, warned it could cripple America's ability to supply the war effort overseas. And it wasn't just sinkings. German U-boats landed saboteurs on American beaches. In June 42, Operation Pastorius saw 8 trained agents, some who'd lived in the U.S. before, disembark on Long Island and Florida with explosives and plans to blow up railways, bridges, factories, and even New York's water supply, aiming to sow terror and disrupt the industry. The goal was to bring the war home, erode morale, and weaken the Allied war machine from within. Yet against this backdrop of vulnerability, the United States did not fall to invasion or widespread sabotage. Instead, a remarkable patchwork of ordinary and extraordinary people stepped into the breach when official defenses lagged. Civilian volunteer pilots from the Civil Air Patrol flew low over the coast in their private planes, spotting U-boats and guiding rescues. Codebreakers and engineers raced to crack Enigma and build machines to track the subs. Naval intelligence partnered improbably with mobsters like Lucky Luciano to secure waterfronts against spies. Double agents turned the tables on infiltrators. Retirees, misfits, even young Boy Scouts played roles in this desperate, ingenious defense. This gripping and largely suppressed story, hidden in archives and behind wartime embargoes, is brought to life in Sara Vladic's new book, The Dangerous Shore: How a Motley Crew of Scientists, Mobsters, Double Agents, Retirees, Volunteer Pilots, and a Boy Scout stopped the invasion of America. Sara Vladic is a New York Times bestselling author of Indianapolis, known for her deep dives into World War II's human and hidden histories. She draws on declassified files, personal accounts, and fresh research to reveal how these unlikely patriots, driven by fierce determination and sheer ingenuity, turned the tide on the home front, saving countless lives and helping secure victory. It is a thrilling reminder that wars are won not just on distant battlefields, but sometimes right here at home, by the people who refuse to stand by. Today we're excited to welcome Sara Vladic to the podcast to discuss The Dangerous Shore, the shocking threats America faced, and the improbable heroes who rose up, and what this forgotten front still teaches us about resilience and unity in crisis. A quick word from our sponsors. Well, Sara, welcome to History Shorts.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
So let's start with you. When did you catch the history bug? Generally speaking, when did this become a passion?
I mean, what's really funny is I actually hated history in school. I had a absolutely terrible AP US history teacher. She was so mean and she was all about date memorization. Like no story, nothing. It was know this name and when this happened. And you could then promptly forget it. So I kind of was like, history. And, but at the same time, I had my dad who loved documentary. And I loved watching those with him. So that was kind of what we sat down and did together. And that's kind of the real bug hit, really the curiosity hit with Indianapolis. I was 13 and I watched a documentary about World War II. And it said, this is the ship that carried the bomb and ended the war and it sunk. And that was it. And I was like, wait, what? Like, excuse me. You're going to tell, I'm going to watch 2 hours of a documentary and you're going to give how the war ended 32 seconds? And I wanted to know more. And I think the mystery of it and the fact that they didn't tell it and why was it not being spoken about? Why did my history teachers had never heard of it? This APUS history teacher had never heard of Indianapolis. And so, I went to the library because we didn't have Google yet. And, that was like
A different
going to
world.
the card catalog was exciting. I mean, I was that kid, right? And so
Me too.
and I just kind of loved that there. But then I thought, well, someone will tell this story someday. It's really cool. I can't believe no one knows about it, but someday it'll be told. And that was kind of, then it got put on pause, but I still at that point loved history. I love stories. And that really was what pulled me in was the people and the experiences and how relatable things were, no matter where you throw a dart in time. Like there's something relatable about it. It was just circumstances were different. And I was like, okay, I could see myself here. What would I have done? I could see myself there. What would I have done? And you always hope you'd be the hero in the story, but there are times where you're kind of like, maybe not. Like,
I
you
would
know,
run.
yes, I would run. Or if
Yeah.
it's my life or their life, what would I choose? You hope, but then you think of the reality. And that kind of was what it pulled me and intrigued me along the way.
And it's awesome because you got to tell that story eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was, yeah, college. I graduated and I thought, well, no one's told that story yet. So I am going to make a movie of this story. And as every 21-year-old believes, they can walk out of college and make, Titanic. And you quickly
Oh, I
realize,
love that.
no, you cannot. But I did get to, I researched and at this time you could now ask Jeeves. And so I asked Jeeves and I found the survivors and they invited me to a reunion and I started going and they invited me back. And next thing, a few years later, they invited me to a Denny's in Las Vegas. And so
That's when you
we're
know you made it. That's
I,
when you know
I
you made
mean,
it.
and it wasn't even the like senior hour. It was the real time Denny's, and so we we went in and they said we want you to be our storyteller. And that was really for me kind of a defining career moment because you take that responsibility very seriously, of course. And I started doing interviews and 10 years and 107 interviews later, did documentary and then wrote a TV series. And then they said it needed to be based on a book. So I wrote a book and here we are.
I
That's
love that
definitely the
you
book
went
I would
backwards about it.
yeah.
Right, usually it's the book that comes first. That's
Yes.
perfect segue. So, how did all of this lead to the Dangerous Shore, your newest one? What was the impetus behind this one?
So this one, there is a story about USS Eagle 56, and a good friend of mine named Kirk introduced me to the Eagle story, saying, it's very parallel to Indianapolis. It has a lot of the same kind of injustices that happened. It was classified as a boiler explosion, but it was really a U-boat that sunk it 3 miles off the coast of Maine, and the guys were fighting for 80 almost years to clear that because they saw the submarine and everyone was like, no, 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 it couldn't have been. The guy in charge of the investigation was the same guy who would have been guilty for letting a U-boat get in without notifying anyone. So conflict of interest. And so naturally they're like, oh, you know about ship injustice and military injustice. You should write this book. And quickly, I was like, okay, this is actually a really interesting story. I don't know if it's a book. And then I started seeing like all these threads appear, all these different storylines that kind of like wrapped into it. And was, I was so familiar with the Pacific, not really all that familiar with the Atlantic and, how close war came to our shores. I really was not aware at all that we had like 300 ships sunk within 5 miles of our coast. And so I started investigating that and who were the players and found this incredible Homefront story. And, it starts like crazy wide. I mean, it's like the entire World War and goes down to one day in April in 45. So um, that was what was fascinating, these 8 storylines and how they came together. And yeah, it started with the Eagle and ended up with this 600-page long book.
Yeah. This motley crew of characters, heroes, anti-heroes you have, how did you go about choosing the right ones to build your narrative around? And were there
Um,
some that were excluded, or were there some that you were like, yeah, I
yeah.
assume, right?
I mean, this is a not so secret, but the book was like 900 pages 2 weeks before I turned it in, and I
Yeah.
was like desperately shaving pages off so that someone would read it. And you don't pick that book up at the store.
But you know what? I have to say, it reads very quickly. To everyone listening, it's a page turner. So you
Awesome.
don't
Thank
worry
you.
about that. Of course.
Yeah, it was the main characters kind of rose to the top, I would say. Like there's a lot of people going on, in this story, a lot of names, but really those 8 are really the ones who you kind of naturally follow, and they had an arc throughout the narrative from the beginning of the war to the end. They kind of
Mhm.
had this solid storyline. So those were the ones. And I mean, frankly, some of them are just really cool characters. The Grace Buchanan Deneen, the double agent, is like very Cruella DeVille with her
Yeah.
long cigarette and her fur coats. And, they're just fun. And like, if this is ever a TV thing, she's the one I'd want to play.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, it's perfect segue, because my next question is like, let's get into some of these stories, and I have like a 3-part question, and you kind of might have answered it, but maybe not. So my first question is, who out of all of these main characters do you think surprised you the most when
Oh,
doing
man.
this research?
Oh, y- maybe I think a Joe Desch might have been one of them, and Ken Knowles kind of combined the Phantom Fleet and the American Bomb, the BOMBE bomb, the code breaking storyline, and just how much those 2 individuals truly impacted the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. Like, it's wild to me that it comes down to like 2 people. I mean, there's obviously teams built around them, but they were everyday people. Like Ken Knowles was almost like, I think, legally blind and, had these medical conditions, if you will, that he couldn't fight. He wanted to go be on a ship with, he had been on the ship in earlier and then was medically retired. So he comes out of this and he's not the guy you would think would be the hero. And that's what was so interesting to me. So him, and then Joe Desch is this, 30 something year old from Dayton, Ohio, who works for National Cash Register, like super brain guy who wins he's won like the Art of Fisticuffs championship. And he's building this device that's breaking the code at like real speed or real time. And those kind of people were like, what? Wait, how do I not know about them? But they're the unlikely characters. So I had a lot of fun with that. And then obviously the pilots and the kind of, there's so many fun stories. It's hard to pick one, but I think those 2 surprised me just in how important they were. And they were just everyday people.
So, a second part of the question, if you had to do a follow-up, like offshoot book, which character would you pick to then just continue that story with?
I think Grace is the character she's the double agent because, without giving too much away of what happens, like, she does get arrested eventually, but then as soon as she gets out, like she disappears from the face of this earth. And we've have all these clues and where she might be and where obviously she's now gone, passed away, but what was this mystery following her? And because she could become anyone, she was a chameleon. And so I'm like, did she, land in Canadian soil and become another spy of sorts? Did she do something with the Cold War? Did she, what happened? And that's, I think I want to know.
Who plays her in a movie?
Oh man, I think Emily Blunt.
Oh, I could see that. Yes, that's cool.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm like, I can totally see that. Okay. So with that in mind, it's interesting too, what you mentioned this, because, you're talking about like a picture, one moment in time, these people are getting together, essentially together or not together, but, are one moment in time in history. And as you probably know yourself from writing books, as historians, we get curious about these people. I mean, you start to almost miss some of these people as you, I mean, you spent a long time with these guys, right? And is there anybody in particular that you felt like you would be like, all right, I'm kind of like sad to let them go, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think Joe Desch again would be one. I had the privilege of working with his daughter, and she kept incredible records. But I got to know Joe like as the man before the war too, and who he was, and then who he was as a father. And it was like I almost feel like I'm family with Joe in some
Yeah.
ways. And yeah, I'm like, okay, but I want to tell more about Joe. And yeah, anyways, yeah, exactly that. You have that, you kind of build this relationship with a person you've never met, and it's wild, you know?
It is. Yeah, especially since it's like across time and space,
Yes,
really, sometimes, right? It's
exactly. Yeah.
surreal. It's surreal. And a lot of people, like, even when I'm reading your book, a lot of books finish up with like an afterword, like, we know, and this is what happens to them later. But, it becomes, because again, it's just one picture. And this is what but like, I want to know more. Like, but you would be like a octopus, you would just need to go massive stories in every direction.
Yes, yes. Maybe that's what, I'm not doing a podcast because I think you're very talented at it, and that's not, I wouldn't be. But if like I were to do
Thanks.
something, those maybe the offshoots would be that.
Yeah. Or like a like a mini series, do
Oh yeah.
because yeah, that would be kind of cool. I could see this as like a Netflix miniseries,
I
like
me
switching
too.
between like the characters. Yeah, I could totally see. Let's talk to somebody.
I
We'll
feel
use
like got it. Hello, someone out there. You
someone
have
out there.
connections.
Let us
Call
know.
us.
Call us. That's right. All right. So the one interesting part, out of many here, was the inclusion of organized crime, right? Like recruiting dock workers, longshoremen to watch these German agents. It kind of adds like a moral complex layer to this story. And what is the government's willingness to partner with mobsters? Tell us about just desperate pragmatism of wartime, in a
Well,
sense.
you know, it was interesting researching that because you have this whole backstory, knowing what the Meyer Lansky started Murder Incorporated. I mean, he does not have a clean slate, so it's kind of this: do we trust them? Do we not? And it was super interesting listening to, and there's a lot of transcripts of interviews with those who lived through it, and that's what I based the quotes and everything off. But they really had the guys that were involved with this program in naval intelligence had an incredibly hard time justifying this work. There was obviously the ones that were super gung ho and let's do this, because the fact was is we were getting no information. We were, we had spies land, we had they had union labor strikes kind of things, which were guys of like, we're not helping the war effort. And all of these things were eventually controlled by the mob and stopped. So they defended the New York harbor. They kept any union strikes from happening. These things I don't think would have been possible without their help. Now, where's that fine line of someone getting in the way and all of a sudden that someone disappearing,
Yeah.
disappearing, you know? And so and that you have to understand too, I'm sure everybody knows this, but like most of the industry went through New York Harbor to get to London and to get overseas to help with the effort in Europe. So if that is stopped, that's chokehold on the war effort, right? So if you have this group of the mob helping, do you say no? Like, I don't know. And that's again, I kind of put that out there for the reader to decide, not telling them this is right or this is wrong, but here's
Yeah.
what happened and how the decisions were made. What would you do? And yeah, it was an interesting balance in how secret they kept it, and then how they swept it under the rug when it was over with, which was interesting. And it had happened to Meyer Lansky before with the Bund rallies, where he kind of cleaned up, and as soon as it was done, the government and the press and everybody turned on them. So he had precedent, and yet he still did the right thing in this
Yeah.
situation. And it's
Yeah.
just, it was kind of seeing that was kind of a theme that went through it, is like, we use these people and they give everything, and then we kind of shove them aside when we're done with them, and they're never recognized, they're never honored, and they played such an important part. But that was interesting to see and come across in that moral compass, if you will. Like, is this
Yeah.
right? Is this wrong? And who's doing the right and wrong? Is it the
Yeah.
government or our people or what? So
Yeah, you almost like you can't not root for them, right? I mean, and that's where the ambiguity comes into play because you're like,
Yeah,
yes, no, no, yes, but but in this moment in time, you root for them. There was that movie with
absolutely. Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart. I don't. Do you remember the movie Humphrey Bogart? That it was filmed during World War II, and they were like mobsters, and they were stopping like Nazis and Nazi spies. It was kind of similar to
Oh,
this. I have to. I think it's called "It Happened One Night." I think that's what it's called.
it
If you
might
look
be.
it up,
Yeah.
"It Happened One Night."
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like 1943, and it's basically this storyline, but with Humphrey Bogart. Yeah,
Okay.
it's
I will check that out. Yeah.
yeah. No, it was actually pretty good. I even got my wife to watch it. She's like, "What's on TV?" I'm like, "Shh, enjoy it. It's gonna be great."
Yes, you'll be fine.
And she's like on her iPad, and finally she's like, all of a sudden I look over and she's watching. And I'm like, got her. Like, yeah.
Yes. Those are the victories we need.
Yeah, yeah. You were saying your husband's not in history, right, or movies or anything like that, right?
No, not movies. He's an engineer, and
Yeah,
he has embraced it, and especially with Indianapolis, like he married into it, and
yeah.
so
He had no choice.
he had no choice. But he did actually end up being my camera guy for a lot of the
Oh,
interviews. We would
love it.
travel, in between work, we would travel and do interviews, and then this time, when he's doing work and he happens to be in DC or something, he would pick up our files at the archives for me.
Yeah,
So he's involved now. He's all
he's
in.
involved. He's in.
Whether or not he likes it, he's all in.
I love that. So you've written about like espionage and secretive history of World War II before, obviously. But what distinguishes this intelligence story from the perhaps more famous spies or clandestine narratives of World War II?
I think part of it is that they were reservists. Most of those involved in this really were everyday folks who were not intelligence officers. They were part of the voluntary service program, and like before Pearl Harbor broke out, they were newspapermen, they were lawyers, they were accountants. And then they essentially signed up that if war broke out, they would put a uniform on and become an officer. And that's who ran these intelligence programs. So, I don't think we know that. I mean, I even was learning about how essential the reservists were in the war. And that really gets left out. Everyone thinks, oh, it's military, and they categorize it as military. But I mean, they weren't even shown how to wear a uniform properly. They were like they got it all messed up, and they're
Discombobulated.
they're learning essentially the basics that they can survive, but they go from being a civilian to an officer in months, not in years, or not in going through, officers OCS or any of that kind of thing. So these were, again, everyday people, and that was the intelligence side, and maybe that helped them relate to the, with the spies, with the espionage, with all those things. It was other real people they were dealing with, not as a military dealing with a civilian kind of thing. So maybe they were more inclined to think outside the box than would normally be allowed. And I think that gave more opportunity for success.
So I know this is probably terrible to ask already because you are still your book's just coming out. But I feel like usually, at least for me, one book leads to another. I find things as I'm doing research where I'm like, ooh, 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 ooh. I get excited, like put it to the side. I'll get to this. You don't have to tell me what it is, but do you have an inkling of where you're going next?
I do. Well, I have two. I'm narrowing it down. So,
Okay.
we'll
You have
we'll
to
see.
pick.
But I always think, what's bigger than this one? And I'm like,
Yeah.
we'll
And
find
you
out
need
when
to
I
like
decide. Stay
yeah,
tuned.
exactly. And and also it's gonna you have to almost sign off a few years of your life. So it's a big decision.
Yeah.
You're like, what do I want to do for the next 2, 3 years of my life? It's
Yes.
like at
Who
least.
are
Yeah.
the people I want to become, my friends, like kind of my
Yeah.
imaginary friends, because you're
Yes.
going to live in that world for the next 2 to 3 years and
Absolutely.
research and all the things. So I
All
feel
right. So
like I should
Sarah,
find something that is like, okay, where do I want to travel and what food do I want?
yes.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. Well, you know what? I have some authors I talk to, they're like, my next book, definitely in English. It's like, because like wherever they have to go, right, for their research. So some people are like, no, 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 next one, I'm gonna pick something that's like in my home state where I could just like find most of the stuff here.
Yes, yes. And what's funny is, so even with that, I speak German, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is in German, and I didn't ever really think about it, but World War II German and U-boat German and spy German is not conversant present day German.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
You learn quick. You learn quick, right?
I was like, wait, okay, I don't know any of those words. So that, but to give you a little tiny hint of what might be next, I may have to learn ancient Greek and Aramaic. So yeah.
Ooh. Wow, that's a woo. You went just completely opposite directions.
I know. And you know what? Duolingo has neither.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. It's so funny you said that because I'm fluent in Polish and I just submitted the first few chapters to my publisher for a book that's not coming out till like 2027 about like Polish World War II, essentially couriers and spies. But I'm like, I'm fluent in it. I got it. But I also am fluent in like I was born in Poland, but I left when I was like 10. So it's
Mhm.
like second, third grade tops. So when you start reading like like highly classified documents in Polish, I'm like, like maybe I'm not fluent in Polish.
I absolutely can relate to this so well. Yes.
It's so funny because
Humbling.
yes, yes. I'm like sitting at the Hoover Institute, in Stanford, and I'm like, I don't. They're like, do you need anything to translate? I'm like, no, I got this. And then 2 seconds later, I'm like, like, what does this mean?
Scanning it with Google
Yes,
Translate.
yes. Tell me more. It's so crazy.
So true.
So I usually finish these interviews with kind of like, I guess, a fun question. But what do you read for fun? When you actually have time, because obviously we read a lot for our jobs and research. But if you have a moment, you're going to the beach, what do you pick up?
Wow. It's honestly been so long since I picked up a book for fun. My friend just I mean, because very quick story is that 2 weeks before the book was due, I got roughly 12,000 pages of research that I had
Wow.
that changed the book and ended up
Wow. Yeah.
postponing it. So my world has been like reading that for so long that I wasn't like, hey, let's pick
Yeah.
something up. But my friend just gave me Rebecca Yarros series, and I I don't know. I mean, I read everything. I should say
Yeah.
that. That's kind of a cop out answer, but I just love reading when I can read, and we'll see. I'll let you know what I think of that one because it's
Nice.
absolutely fantasy, other side of the spectrum. So
Yes. Yes. Well, I guess we could do it this way. Would you like, so I don't know about you, but I read so much nonfiction for this job, for the podcast to talk to people like you and for my research, I read so much nonfiction that when I do find a moment, I just go to fiction. Like
oh
it's an
yeah,
escape. It's an escape for me. I can't, it's almost like I love history so much, but it's become a job. So now I'm like, no, give me something about like elves and, like something in
yes,
Middle Earth, something,
yeah.
right?
I mean, I love Harry Potter. I
Oh my
love
God. Yes. Oh, I
yeah,
read them so many times.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I could read them, or I could even listen to Jim Dale doing the audiobook
Yeah.
over and over. But so yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. Like, I mean, I will read nonfiction, but generally that's not my go-to when I'm turning my brain off.
Yeah, 100%. And also I noticed I was talking to Harry Turtledove, like a month ago, and he said that I mean, he writes alternate history and fiction, but he said being a writer ruined somewhat reading for him because he said, "I get so critical when I read other people's work." He's like, "And I don't even wanna be mean." I'm just like, I wouldn't have written that way." Yeah, like, you
Yes.
mentioned this a paragraph ago, like
Yeah.
and as
Yeah.
second he said that to me like a month ago, and now I'm like, "Dang it." I
It
feel like I can't get it
yes.
out,
My
right?
husband calls me on it too a lot because I'll be, if I'm sitting there reading, I'm like, "Ugh, this is no, no." And then and I'm not a mean person, a critically
Yeah,
mean
yeah,
person. I'm
of
just,
course.
I'm sitting there thinking like if this were mine, I would edit it a different way,
Yes, yes.
So yes, okay, I'm not alone then. I feel better.
Yeah, it's not you're not alone, absolutely not. Oh my goodness, Sarah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time today. This was a great interview.
Thank you, Peter. I had a lot of fun. It was great.